A midsummer's day in Shakespeare country in the heart of England.
When Gerry travelled down the motorway, he was that person and he was that opportunity.
On a major motorway, two bitter rivals collide.
That rivalry is born out of basic, pure hatred for one another.
An execution-style killing in the fast lane.
For what? His life, this beautiful man's life, was taken for a patch of clothing.
What were the tragic events that led to the murder of a Hell's Angel? August the 12th, 2007, and the M40 motorway, the main route between Britain's two largest cities, London and Birmingham, is heavy with traffic.
All of a sudden, red brake lights, anchors on, come to a rather quick and unexpected stop.
With nothing moving, it soon became clear this was no normal traffic jam, and major tailbacks soon began to build up.
People were occupying their time by taking their dogs for walks or taking their toddlers into a field for a pee break. People were chatting, people turned up the radio. A lot of people were just kicking back, reclining in their seats and just relaxing. And then there was a small group of us that were just keeping an eye out and an ear out for what was going on ahead.
We're just driving south on the M40 motorway. We're just coming up to the Warwick service station. There's a motorcyclist laying flat out in the middle of the fast lane. Somebody needs to get here pretty bloody quickly.
This was the first the police knew that a man had been shot on the motorway.
We realised that there was likely to have been a fatality when the radio reports said that there'd been a death due to a car accident. And then also the amount of emergency vehicles going down the hard shoulder, one of which was a doctor's car.
When police arrived minutes later, they found a biker dead on the road. This was no road traffic accident, though. Obvious bullet wounds revealed it was an assassination.
The body found lying here on the fast lane of the M40 was that of a Hell's Angel, Gerry Tobin. But why was he killed, and why such a public execution on a road packed with families and holidaymakers? With unprecedented access to the police investigation and to the family of Gerry Tobin, we've pieced together the crucial events leading up to the murder, the death of an angel.
The murder of a Hell's Angel put a huge pressure on the police to solve the case quickly. With so many aggrieved fellow angels, they had to show they could be trusted to bring the killer to justice.
The only people who really witnessed the shooting itself were Gerry's riding companions. They gave us initially some accounts, but very shortly after, probably within half an hour or so, they then refused to speak to us.
As word of the execution spread, from the angels came a wall of silence. This secrecy would complicate the task of identifying the body. The police needed a name, but no one would come forward.
It's the only case I think I've ever been involved in where I have confirmed publicly to the media the identity of a murder victim without having had a formal identification. That's because I was satisfied that we had identified him by other means, and I was clearly satisfied and convinced of his identity.
Gerry Tobin was identified by his belongings. His wallet and personal effects gave the police his name.
A key part for me is to establish a motive, and that need, to assist with that, you need to understand Gerry and Gerry's life and whether he had enemies, etc.
Real Crimes has uncovered unseen archive footage of Gerry from the Bulldog Bash in 2006. This gives us the briefest of snapshots of Gerry's secretive life in the Angels. Even his mother was totally unaware that he was a member. What information we do know is provided by an undercover officer who has investigated this organisation and other motorcycle clubs.
Everything I know about Gerard Tobin tells me that he was a decent guy, that he loved motorbikes, and to that end he was a very proficient and skilled mechanic. And I'm sure that part of the reason he was taken up and become a member of the Hells Angels was that skill that he brought to them of being able to work on motorcycles and work on the club motorcycles.
When murdered, Tobin had been riding home after one of the biggest events in the Hells Angels calendar, the Bulldog Bash. A 3-day jamboree held near Stratford-upon-Avon with burnouts, drag racing and rock music. It is a meet that attracts thousands of bike enthusiasts. It is also an unmissable event for Hells Angels, the one time in the year where members of this secretive organisation all come together in one place. Canadian author and journalist Julian Scher has written extensively about clubs such as the Hells Angels and other motorcycle organisations, mainly in the USA and Canada. He expresses his views on their activities.
On the one hand, they have a brand that tends to symbolize we're just lovable rascals, we're rebels, that Hollywood easy rider type of look, where it's sort of have fun, you're riding on the Harley, you're anti-establishment. They organize charity runs. I mean, for goodness sake, the Hells Angels rode in the Queen's Jubilee in 2002. And that gives them an entree. That gives them an air of legitimacy and danger. And yet, the other part of their message with the death head, with the patch, is we are the Hells Angels. Don't mess with us. We will beat the crap out of you. It's called the death head, you know. It's not called the, we're just going to tap you on the noggin head.
The Hells Angels were formed in America in the 1950s. It wasn't until 1969 that they arrived on these shores, and today police estimate there are 250 fully patched members in the UK and about 100 probationers. But they are only one of the outlaw biker groups operating in the UK today. Others include the Devil's Disciples, the Barbarians and the Patriots. In all, there are believed to be around 25 active clubs with as many as 1,500 members, the biggest of which are the Outlaws with around 430 members, bitter rivals to the Angels.
The Hells Angels and other outlaw gangs will often wear a 1% badge or a tattoo or a patch. And the 1% comes from the birth of the biker gangs in the late 1940s in America, when bikers rolled into a small town in California and trashed it. Legitimate motorcyclists said 99% of us are peace-loving, law-abiding motorcyclists. And the outlaw biker said, we're the 1%. When I've talked to Hells Angels leaders, on the one hand they'll say we're not criminals, but on the other hand they say we respect only our own laws and we will settle our own legal matters.
And Gerry Tobin was proud to be a 1%er with the Hells Angels. As the hedonistic Bulldog Bash came to an end, he joined hundreds of other bikers making their way home among the Sunday drivers and holiday traffic.
They left the Bulldog Bash, I think, at around 1:45 or 1:50 on the afternoon of Sunday the 12th of August and travelled north.
Gerry rode as the lead of the 3-bike convoy. He was followed by 2 probationers. This was a strict part of the Hells Angel code. The probationers have to show respect for the fully patched member.
There they are, there they are, they're there.
Gerry's patches that he wore with such pride were to turn him into an obvious target. After a weekend at the Hells Angels Bulldog Bash Festival, Gerry Tobin is heading for home. He's caught on CCTV filling up at a petrol station. 20 minutes later, he'd become part of a sickening scene, murdered in broad daylight.
Having fueled his motorcycle at these pumps, he walked across and there was a camera on the corner of the building over there, the shop building. And for some reason which was never explained and we'll never know, is he glanced up and he looked at the camera and smiled up at the camera before going into pay and then leaving and then heading off to the motorway.
At about 2:10, Gerry Tobin passed a green Rover in a lay-by on the A40.
And as the bikes came down here and passed, the Green Rover would have recognised the patches on Gerry's back and the fact that he was a Hells Angel and pulled very quickly at great speed off of this lay-by. So much so that another witness driving down had to swerve to avoid the car coming off.
M40. If they're going on the M40, follow them on the M40.
The three motorcycles, apparently unaware of this, carried on down this road towards the M40, followed then by the Green Rover.
I was joining the M40 off of the A46, and in the particular lanes as you approach the main junction, I was actually undertaken by a Green Rover 600 with a number of occupants. And I actually noted it at the time because I thought that was a particularly clean example. So I made a mental note of that particular vehicle, and it wasn't until later that the press asked for information on this 600 Rover.
At 2:17, Gerry Tobin enters the M40, being followed by the Green Rover.
Well, this is the overbridge over junction 13. So this is the last junction that Gerry would have travelled past before he was shot. He would have travelled from the north, which is the direction over there. He would have travelled south on that carriageway, under this bridge. So from this point on, Gerry was probably 1 minute away from being shot.
We're going to do this. Let's do this. Let's get them on. Get them out of the way. Get that little bastard. Get a bit more. Bit closer. Now. Shoot it.
Warwickshire Police, how may I help you?
Hello? We're just driving south on the M40 motorway. We're just coming up to the Warwick service station. There's a motorcyclist laying flat out in the middle of the fast lane. Somebody needs to get here pretty bloody quickly.
At 2:23, a 999 call was made, and within minutes the emergency services were on the scene. The police were faced with a man dead on the tarmac, his friends frantically trying to save his life. His beloved Harley had continued riderless for 100 metres. And one of Britain's major motorways became a crime scene.
First of all, when you have a crime scene, what you're trying to do is to preserve the evidence. You don't want your forensic evidence disappearing off in the treads of tyres or on people's feet and so on. That's at any crime scene, and so the M40 posed some real particular challenges.
At 2:29, the paramedics arrived at the scene. They did what they could, but Gerry was pronounced dead at 2:47. The Warwickshire Police were now dealing with a major investigation.
It was suggested by a paramedic fairly soon into it that he thought maybe there was a possibility of the victim having been shot.
The M40 was now a murder scene and would remain closed while forensic teams pored over it with a fine-tooth comb.
We didn't know at that time from where he'd been shot. From a static point at the side of the motorway, from a vehicle travelling in north or southerly direction. We weren't sure about anything there, so we had to preserve everything.
The police desperately appealed for witnesses. Somebody must have seen the shooting. Was Gerry killed by a lone assassin, or were there more than one killer? A complete wall of silence was starting to form over Gerry Tobin's murder.
One of the difficulties we have dealing with motorcycle gangs of this type is that they are very reluctant to speak to us, very reluctant to assist us, even if the victim is one of their own.
Real Crimes did approach the Hells Angels for comment about Gerry, but they declined to take part in the programme.
The Hells Angels follow a kind of double track. On the one hand, they're very in your face, very flashy. They have web pages. They'll parade through a town during the Bulldog Bash or other activities. So they have a very image conscious, very Hollywood way to present themselves. At the same time, they have this very strict code of silence where they almost always refuse to talk to journalists and they always refuse to talk to police. And that's part of their secretive nature.
And this was exactly what the investigators were starting to experience at the crime scene. The Warwickshire police force was met by a secretive world they did not understand.
The scene was difficult to manage in the immediate aftermath of Gerry having been shot. Clearly, mobile phones were used to pass on that information, and many bikers and Hells Angels attended all around the vicinity of the scene of Gerry's murder. In fact, one person travelling on the northbound, just immediately prior to us closing the northbound carriageway, came across and actually ripped off the patches from Gerry's jacket. I understand that those patches are always deemed the property of the club itself, and they would not want those patches to fall into the hands of anybody else.
The most important part of any outlaw motorcycle group member's attire is his patches and his leather vest that he wears.
The patches on the jacket are split into three. The top rocker, as it's known, depicts the motorcycle club. The middle badge is the emblem of that club, and the bottom badge is the area or chapter they come from. And to obtain all three patches is the ultimate goal. To become a fully patched member, you have to endure 2 years of probation. That is thought to be a tough examination of your desire to join the Angels.
That is everything they're about, it's their essence. So the attainment of the full patch is everything to that individual.
At the crime scene, there is a major breakthrough. The 48-hour fingertip search has paid off with the discovery of a significant piece of evidence.
We recovered a shell casing, a 7.65 shell casing on the motorway, which had been ejected from a semi-automatic weapon.
This looked likely to be the shell case of the fatal shot, but the ballistic examination revealed it didn't match the bullet recovered during Gerry's autopsy.
Well, it was quite unusual that the 9mm bullet that was found in Mr. Tobin was something that you'd normally see found fired from a self-loading pistol. The markings from the bullet that was found in Mr. Tobin were characteristic of a revolver, more typical of a Webley Enfield revolver.
This type of gun doesn't dispense its cartridges, therefore it could not match the casing found at the murder scene.
For the cartridge case, again, we identified the calibre, and we also indicated to the police that we thought that these marks were typical of a 7.65 self-loading pistol.
The casing was linked to a hole in Gerry Tobin's mudguard, so there must have been 2 guns fired. The trajectory of the bullet also revealed that Gerry was shot at close range. The gunman must have travelled alongside him to deliver the fatal bullet. This was a major breakthrough for the detectives.
Get that little bastard! Get a bit more! Bit closer! Bit closer! Now! Shoot!
The next was to be found on a back lane near Coventry.
The next piece of evidence that came to us was information that a car had been found burning in an area west of Coventry, in the West Midlands area. We couldn't tell the colour from the car because it had been completely burnt, but we managed to get the identifying marks from the car on the police national computer.
Once they checked the number plate against the PNC computer, it stated the car was blue, but on further investigation they found it was Caspian blue, which in bright sunlight appears green. This meant they had a positive match. They'd found the murderer's car. The police then received a tip-off about the owner of the Green Rover.
A member of the public phoned in and said there was such a car parked in Coventry, and they had seen somebody who they described as a biker type.
This vital information gave the police a name: Sean Crichton. This was the biggest breakthrough of the investigation, but the best was yet to come.
A murder hunt is underway tonight after a motorcyclist was shot dead on the
police
M40.
have released CCTV images of Gerry Tobin, the Hells Angel biker, shot and killed on the
developments in the hunt for the M40 killer. Police say they have some significant information, but still no motive. They now say 2 shots were fired from a passing Rover, which contained 2 or 3 people.
At the Harley-Davidson dealership in southeast London where he worked, there's still shock at his death. For police, the key is to find a motive.
On the 12th of August 2007, Hells Angel Gerry Tobin was murdered. With the killers still at large, investigators and police officers were racing against the clock to gather any evidence and eyewitness reports that could lead to the murderers. Vitally, they had a name: Sean Crichton.
Sean Crichton, and was a member of a local chapter in South Warwickshire of the Outlaws. It was becoming apparent to me then that Outlaws and Hells Angels weren't the best of friends.
So specialist covert filming teams were sent out to track down Crichton, to gather as much intelligence as possible on him and his associates.
Crichton was known to us. He was known historically. He had been involved in a number of other incidents, and we were aware of that.
The undercover police surveillance focused on the Warwickshire Outlaws, filming them without their knowledge from across the street. They were able to identify all 7 gang members, and their leader was thought to be Sean Crichton. He had an extensive criminal history dating back to 1981. His record included firearms and drug offences. He was also linked to another known criminal, Simon Turner.
And it's my opinion, based on the contact I've been able to have within that inquiry, that Simon Turner was a particularly a nasty individual who had an absolute loathing and hatred of the Hells Angels.
As the investigation continued to collect evidence on the outlaw gang, Gerry Tobin still needed to be formally identified. This grim task fell to his mother, who had travelled from Canada after hearing the tragic news.
The detectives came and drove me to the morgue to see my boy. And I'd never experienced a morgue or anything before. And he had a white sheet over him. I saw his face. And I was saying, I was touching him, and I began to talk to him, to sing to him, you know, because I knew it was my boy. I knew then there was nowhere other than to play with death, you know, other than to say to death, oh, you can't have him. Can't have him, he belongs to me, you know, he's mine. So I wanted to wrap him in a cloth and carry him to home, was my instincts.
Gerry was born on the 26th of March 1972 in Macclesfield, Cheshire, an only child. He moved with his parents to Canada and spent most of his youth growing up in Peace River, Alberta.
And we never had an ounce of trouble, not 1 ounce of trouble, with Gerard Michael.
He was a religious person who enjoyed giving Bible lessons at the local Sunday school. It was during this time he first got a taste for motorbikes and was often seen arriving at church on his Harley-Davidson.
The very first bike he bought himself was a Harley Davidson, a special edition Harley Davidson. The Harley Davidson was and meant everything to our Gerry. There was no other bike but a Harley Davidson. I remember these times with joy, yeah, absolutely.
His mother only found out Gerry was a Hell's Angel when she heard of his death.
Of course, we were in trauma at that time, immediate trauma, along with our grief and a sudden death like that of your child. And although he was 35, he's still our kid, you know.
5 days since Gerry's murder, and the police were under extreme pressure to solve this case. International biker clubs had been violently feuding for many years, and the police feared it would spread to our shores.
The rivalry between the Hells Angels and the Outlaws on a global basis has been long-standing, and that rivalry is born out of basic, pure hatred for one another. And I would say to you that the hatred between them is palpable. You could almost cut the hatred between them. It's that bad.
The Outlaw Motorcycle Club in the UK have been actively recruiting. Their numbers are estimated to be 430 fully patched members, with 100 probationers waiting for the chance to earn their full patch.
You're talking about empires that straddle the globe, that began in the United States but now know no international borders. They try to control certain areas, and they will use any means possible in order to stake their ground, to keep their turf, and to compete with the rival gangs. And so when you get an outbreak of violence in a motorway in England, you have to see it as part of this global battle between these gangs that straddle the globe.
In the last 60 years, there have been 3,670 deaths around the world as a result of biker conflicts. Countless bombings in Australia, the United States and Canada. In Norway, a Scandinavian biker war broke out between the Hells Angels and the Banditos. This violent conflict lasted for 3 years. It left 11 dead and 96 wounded. The war ended in a truce in 1997. So far, Britain has escaped the mass bloodshed seen overseas, but the police have concerns that the violence between the motorcycle gangs could erupt and are determined not to be complacent.
This isn't just a Warwickshire issue, it's not just a British issue, it's an international issue, and what's happened is our eyes have been opened to the potential for the sort of violence we saw when Gerry Tobin was shot to happen in the future.
You may not have seen all the violence that we've seen in Canada, in North America, in Australia, and in Europe. But finally, when there's a murder, when there's a gang warfare that hits England, there is a sense, well, kind of wake up and smell the coffee. This is what biker gangs are all about.
But what triggered the violent act that killed Gerry Tobin could be closer to home. The Angels hold their Bulldog Bash at a site near Stratford-upon-Avon, which the South Warwickshire chapter of the Outlaws see as their territory. Day 6 and the investigation was moving at a rapid pace. They'd retrieved the burnt-out car. They had 2 named suspects with connections to rival biker clubs. And now, to find the evidence that would put them in the frame, CCTV became the focus of the investigation.
This footage here is at Gaydon filling station just off junction 12 of the M40. We can see Sean Crichton just get out of the rear passenger seat. Quite clearly the 2 of them there stood in their winter jackets, winter hats, flat caps. You can also see that there are people in summer clothing, and what struck us was the fact that the clothing that Crichton was wearing seemed very out of place for the 12th of August.
This revealing CCTV footage placed Crichton and the other 2 members of the gang acting suspiciously in a Green Rover near the vicinity of the murder.
We clearly had images of the registration number, which married up with the burnt-out Green Rover, so it started to come together. And I believed at that point clearly we were in the right direction, and that it was appropriate at that point to make arrests and gather whatever other evidence we could get.
3 men have been arrested over the murder of Gerry Tobin, the Hells Angel biker shot dead on the M40.
Armed police carried out early morning raids on 3 homes.
Armed officers arrested 3 men in connection with the murder of Gerry Tobin. The men have been taken to a police station in Warwickshire.
After raiding 3 properties in Coventry and Nuneaton.
The biker was shot while riding his bike as he was travelling on the M40 10 days ago.
On Saturday, the 22nd of August, just 10 days after Gerry's murder, Sean Crichton, Simon Turner and Dane Garside were in custody, helping the police with their inquiries.
And I could have drawn the line under that and said, well, the case is done. But I felt quite strongly that actually others were probably involved in this.
The 4 remaining members of the gang were under the scrutiny of the law. The undercover police had identified them through the surveillance footage they'd gathered on Crichton. They knew names. Now they started checking their movements on the days surrounding Gerry's murder.
We uncovered images of them on the motorway services at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. The white Range Rover had 3 members of the gang in it, and that was stationed at junction 11 at Banbury. The blue Renault, we had sightings and other detail of its movements between those 2 points, between junction 11 and between junction 15.
This evidence would show Carl Garside, Dean Taylor, Ian Cameron and Malcolm Bull in prominent positions staked out along the M40, casting a deadly net to trap a Hells Angel.
They'd been planning the murder for many months, staked out the route and organised their disguises. But they then made the simplest of errors. They'd used their own cars, which could be clearly seen on CCTV, which led to the one thing they hadn't planned on: getting caught.
I think they felt that they'd done enough to remain anonymous. I think after such a short period of time, particularly after 10 days since murdering Gerry, us knocking their door came as a hell of a shock to them, and I think that was evident from their immediate reaction when we did knock their door.
Now the entire chapter of the Warwickshire Outlaws were in custody. But would they break the code of silence when put under intense police questioning?
They simply responded either no comment, the words simply saying no comment, or said nothing at all, absolutely nothing to any questions put to them.
After 40 hours of constant questioning, 6 members of the gang remained silent.
Where were you at 1 o'clock on that Sunday afternoon?
No comment.
And who were you with?
No comment.
How had you left the house that day?
No comment.
Although the gang members were exercising their right to silence, the police gave the suspects every opportunity to defend themselves.
You had the hat on to disguise the tattoos on your head.
No comment.
What can you tell me about the death of Gerry Tobin?
No comment.
The 7th one did speak. He accepted that he was involved with the others in gathering intelligence, gathering information about Hells Angels around the area of the Bulldog Bash site, and that he tried to tell us that was a fairly innocent activity.
Malcolm Bull had broken the #1 rule of silence, and although his statement didn't give much away, he would now have to live with being labelled a grass. 13 days after Tobin's death, DS Lawrence had all the evidence he needed.
We were able to satisfy the Crown Prosecution Service that there was sufficient for them to be charged. So all 7 defendants were charged with murder.
On October the 2nd, the Warwickshire chapter of the Outlaws went on trial at Birmingham Crown Court. The city would be brought to a standstill as the Outlaws rode into town.
Police investigating the shooting of a biker as he rode on the M40 motorway say they're examining the possibility that gangs may be involved in his murder.
Crown Court was told he was targeted by the rival Outlaws biking gang as he left a Hells Angel festival.
Hells Angel Gerry Tobin's murder had caught the attention of the nation. Birmingham city centre ground to a standstill as the 7 defendants of rival gang, the Outlaws, were brought in for trial.
Certainly at the beginning of the trial, there were hundreds of members of the Outlaws motorcycle gang who would come into the city and stand outside. They tried to get inside the court, but only a small number were allowed to do so. But the remainder stood outside and, to be fair, were fairly intimidating to people passing by.
For fear of retaliation from the Hells Angels, a grand-scale armed police operation was put into place to protect the city of Birmingham from an all-out biker war.
It was almost as if the police were transporting a mixture of Hannibal Lecter and the Yorkshire Ripper. Nobody had ever seen anything like it.
We knew that it was a volatile situation. We weren't sure whether Hells Angels intended to also attend the trial. We felt, had they done so, there could have been some quite serious confrontations.
But the Hells Angels kept their distance from the trial, and the anticipated confrontation outside the court never materialised.
Everybody was kept well back, and then the sirens would start and the blue lights would appear, and this great motorcade would come sweeping into the city, police cars at the front and rear, and a prison van in the middle with lights on itself, and they would be swept into the courtroom, straight into an underground entrance, and then the gates would slam shut, and the accused would be led up to the dock.
A dramatic announcement on the first day of the trial. Sean Crichton, leader of the Outlaws, had written a letter to the prison governor of Her Majesty's Prison Woodhill, wanting to change his plea.
Before Crichton's dramatic admission from the dock of court number 12, he'd previously refused to acknowledge the charges against him. A formal plea of
not... The accused has confessed to the killing. Sean Crichton's change of plea to guilty had been kept secret until now on the orders of the judge.
We had a message from a prison governor while he was on remand to say that he wanted to speak to us. And I sent some detectives to see him in prison, and he handed over an A4 sheet of paper in which he confessed that he was responsible for the murder. He denied that any of his companions within the chapter of the Outlaws was responsible, and he pleaded guilty to all offences, the murder and firearms offences, on the very first day of the trial.
This was Crichton's desperate attempt to take the rap, hoping he would save his fellow gang members. His handwritten confession of guilt meant he would not be seen again in court before sentencing. Now it was down to the prosecution to convince the jury that the rest of the gang were equally guilty of the Tobin murder.
They're a frightening bunch. They look like how you would expect them to look. They're heavy-set, fairly grim-faced, tattoos, earrings. They were unwilling to take any part in the trial. It came out in evidence that most of them had been involved in day after day of police interrogation, police questioning, some 40 hours in each case, and almost without exception, they all simply looked back at the police officers and said they had no comment.
Gerry Tobin's mother bravely attended every day of the trial, witnessing the events that led to her only child's murder as they were played out to the court.
You're seeing your son lying on the tarmac, and I remember a helicopter voice saying that there's a biker down, get somebody here bloody fast or something.
He needs to get here pretty bloody quickly.
Maria needed all of her inner strength as she sat in the courtroom just meters from her son's murderers.
One of them stared at me and I looked back. And then this person pulled a face at me. And I stood there with the courage and the strength of my boy, eye to eye. And it was he that needed to turn from me.
Maria watched intently as the prosecution's case against the 6 defendants mounted. The weaponry consisting of knives, machetes, knuckle dusters, and even target practice mannequins. the burnt-out car that had been previously owned by Crichton, and the extensive CCTV images were shown to the court.
It was almost a murder on film. They could be clearly seen riding in convoy, one in front of the other, along the motorway. You could then see the car containing the gunman coming up behind them. Even registration plates were quickly identified from the material that was available to them. So the police did have a pretty strong case. It was almost a murder in pictures.
The defendants offered very little. Simon Turner, unemployed, married with kids, said he was in the clubhouse at the time of the murder. CCTV showed otherwise. Dane Garside, a lorry driver by trade, said he heard a bang whilst driving, but didn't know it was a gunshot. The gang had neglected to cover their tracks. They had planned the murder with precision, but made obvious mistakes. It was almost as if they wanted to be seen. But what drove this gang of 7 to murder? Was it purely a desire for notoriety, or to put the Warwickshire chapter of the Outlaws on the map?
I think we know why Gerry Tobin was killed. Gerry Tobin wasn't killed because of who he was, because of anything Gerry Tobin had done as an individual. Gerry Tobin was killed because he was a member of a gang. Gerry Tobin was killed because of the uniform, the gang uniform, the patch, the Hells Angels patch that he was wearing. So the rival outlaws wanted to kill an enemy. They wanted to kill a Hells Angels, and they didn't care who it was.
Well, next this evening, chilling new images have been shown to a jury in the murder trial of Hells Angel Gerry Tobin. Birmingham Crown Court was told that the biker...
7 members of the Outlaws' South Warwickshire chapter jointly plotted to execute a Hells Angel, most probably because the Hells Angels run an annual biker event, the Bulldog Bash, in Warwickshire, territory the Outlaws consider their own. 6 men, including 4 from Coventry and 1 from Nuneaton, deny murder. A 7th has pleaded guilty.
On the 20th of November 2008, the jury came into court to deliver their verdicts. Had the prosecution done enough to convince them that all 7 members of the Outlaws were guilty of murder?
It was a very interesting experience, really, because the jury deliberated for quite some time, and they came back with verdicts, almost one a day. In every case, they came back with a guilty verdict.
7 gang members found guilty of shooting biker Gerry Tobin have been jailed for life at Birmingham Crown Court.
All 7 defendants were found guilty and sentenced on the 28th of November 2008 to life imprisonment for their part in the cold-blooded murder of Gerry Tobin. Malcolm Bull and Ian Cameron received 25 years. Carl Garside got 26 years. His brother Dane Garside, 27 years. Simon Turner and Dean Taylor will serve 30 years. And Sean Crichton was handed a 28 years minimum term sentence.
Sean Crichton. After he'd been given his sentence, the judge ordered that he be taken down to the prison cells. As he was being led away, he broke free from the prison guards and he went up to Malcolm Bull and he looked into his face. He swore at him and he said,
"I'll see you again."
Malcolm Bull had broken the rule of silence by speaking to the police during the interrogations. In Crichton's eyes, this made him a grass. His life was now in mortal danger.
It was chilling. When that threat was made, the word can only be chilling.
Because of Crichton's death threats, Malcolm Bull is now serving his life sentence in a separate high-security prison for his own safety. No longer is he a member of the outlaw motorcycle gang. As for the rest, they will not be darkening our streets for a very long time.
The police fear that the murder of a Hells Angel would cause an escalation in violence between biker organisations has mercifully not materialised. The Hells Angels say they're a motorcycle club, not a criminal gang. And maybe bringing the killers to justice quickly also helped calm the situation. But ultimately, the murder of Gerry Tobin caused enormous loss to his family and friends. And for what? A patch on his clothing.
I'm sure that anybody in the HA would absolutely have to tell you the truth in the gentleman and the gentle spirit that Gerard Michael walked among them. And how they had said to us as a family that Gerard Michael was a man of few words, but the words he spoke were worth listening to. They were wise words. So they're proud brothers, if you will, in the brotherhood of the motorcycle club to have such a one that they had in our Gerard.
And next week, ITV1's Real Crime retells the story of one of the UK's biggest ever manhunts and asks who was the real Raoul Moat. That's Monday night at 10:35. Next, though, we're off to the zoo.